I am a schizonaut. Well, I call myself one. What is a schizonaut? A person who explores schizophrenia? Isn't that dangerous? I have had times where complete strangers inform me that embracing my experiences with psychosis is a danger to me and those around me, especially after finding out that I'm no longer medicated. Is that really true? Can someone with no experience with me and my own symptoms really affirm such an opinion so aggressively? Are schizophrenics really automatically that dangerous? Technically, I am diagnosed with bipolar 1, but I experienced an extended psychotic episode in 2020 to 2021, which I believe was underdiagnosed and more correctly diagnosed as schizoaffective disorder. This is due to the extensive period of worsening psychosis lasting over 18 months, the symptoms far more aligning with people diagnosed with schizophrenia instead of just bipolar 1, and the subpar quality care that I had access to. This episode caused me significant long-term changes and damage to my ordinary functioning, things that you don't really just recover from even with medication. It ultimately resulted in a transition towards a year-long cycle of symptoms that must be managed carefully, which has changed my life forever. In some sense, everything functions differently, in ways that are so hard to explain, and so I am now faced with new horizons. I have to explore the world through the lens of someone whose mind was shredded so aggressively that every little thing most people take for granted, sensory perception, thoughts, emotions, are unstable in such ways that they can dangerously intersect at seemingly random angles. And what is someone supposed to do when they are met with this new state of affairs? One where you cannot even organize your own thoughts. Medication and therapy can provide some help for some people, but overall, I felt very grim on my prognosis through medicine alone. For me, to really recover in any meaningful capacity, it required a lifestyle change to deal with these new problems on an existential level. To stress, I am extremely lucky and fortunate to be able to organize my social and personal resources enough to be able to recover in any serious capacity from such an extreme illness. Most people do not experience the same recovery that I do, and it is to no fault of their own, but rather the tragic nature of the illness, and my own luck of the draw. It essentially produces a completely random breakdown of your brain, and most people do not have the resources to make it work. But part of making it work for me, and I think this is important for anyone regardless of your situation, is to embrace what has happened to my body. It's to treat my mind as a new configuration that it is my responsibility to learn and understand how to drive. This is why I then started to call myself a schizonaut, a person who explores the extents of what this new body can produce, a body where the world and even the self is unstable and can find new, unexpected connections. Not only does becoming a schizonaut give me a means to contextualize my struggle against the world in ways that language like neurodiversity fails to truly capture, but it provides the surface for a revolutionary politics that extends far beyond just the struggles of the schizophrenic, where instead of reducing the schizophrenic subject to a dangerous, unpredictable animal, they emerge as a potential machine capable of rupturing serialized capitalist subjectivity. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that we should idolize mental illness as some kind of superior savant ability, but rather to see it for what it is. It's something that causes us to act differently. For me, managing mental illness is itself a full-time job. I have to manage the way that my symptoms screw with my everyday life, and it is often in ways that people don't really think about. For example, nobody really thinks about with recovering from psychosis how much it impacts your memory and awareness of your surroundings, things that can make managing life really difficult. Imagine forgetting what you were doing just a few seconds ago all the time. It's gotten pretty bad and only seems to be getting worse over time. Sometimes I freeze up and I can't move. I know what's going on around me, but I can't move because my body feels disconnected from my mind. Other times I am almost too weak to get out of bed and barely conscious. Every year, I have shifts in my symptoms with the seasons, and I have to stay on my toes for dealing with different problems at different times. People fixate on the hallucinations because it reminds many people of what hallucinogenic substances may feel like, especially for those who have tried. But psychosis doesn't feel like any drug. It's scary, exciting, confusing, and an experience like no other, but similar to how being run over by a truck is an experience like no other. In comparison to less flashy symptoms, hallucinations are largely manageable for me. At the end of the day, I have to live with the consequences of psychosis from years ago, and I will continue to live with these consequences for the rest of my life. When you deal with such a life-changing experience that is so hard to explain, and for other people who have never felt it themselves, it becomes alienating and confusing. So the way I learned how to survive was to understand my newly reconfigured body and how it interfaces with the world around me. A lot of my recovery has been focused on understanding subtle differences about how things have changed. What I experienced was really difficult to describe, and I think it's part of the reason why the question of what it feels like to lose your mind is so hard to explain, because it's the breakdown of the very codes that actually organize your mind in the first place. For me, I learned how to experience this as a literal breakdown of codes. I've adapted to this unstable mental field by understanding everything in my internal subjectivity are enunciations that are produced by hard, material, physical interactions passing through my body and the outside world. For example, in my episodes, I lose the ability to often properly differentiate tactile stimulus. I can't feel differences anymore, and everything feels weird and soft. By recognizing this, I can identify when I'm having certain kinds of issues. Additionally, I've learned to follow up the intense, overheated delusional thinking I experience in positive episodes with questions of what it reveals about the state of the world outside of the codes that I experience. It's allowed me, with good reliability, to detect whether a certain stimulus, such as certain species of cicada, water drops, or alternating light, sounds, or electrical currents, can cause ruptures in the code space that I experience every day. These ruptures can be extremely risky. After all, it was a series of ruptures that caused my psychotic episode in 2021 that lasted for months and months, and resulted in my permanent instability, especially with my vision. This is not a game. In most cases, it is important to identify them quickly and withdraw from the stimulus. Not doing so can easily trigger an episode that can leave me incapacitated for days, if not worse, and it can also lead to longer-term instability and potentially even cause issues down the line. But there are cases that I also just let it slide, because the effect is enjoyable. Perhaps there's something that I feel that I'm gaining from it, or whatever reconfiguration is doing to my mind, it reveals to me things that only become apparent later. In a way, I'm dealing with an unstable subjectivity, one that's broken down the concept of I into a shaky simulation that really only exists reflexively to continue to function in a world where I is a requirement for social functioning. But more importantly, and this is for any schizophrenic who watches this, from those who just want their lives to get back to normal, to those who want to have different ideas on how to deal with their illness, is to understand what matters most is making sense of the interface between your body and the outside world. It doesn't matter how you get there. For me, denying the fucked up reality that I was experiencing only made me more dysfunctional. I had to compromise with what I know would be diagnosed as delusional thinking. When I focused on being able to survive in this crazy world, which is not an easy task when you're already so disorganized to begin with, I was able to create my own understanding of my condition that allowed me to navigate. To be clear, I'm not saying that this will cure anyone, but it is a reminder that what is more important than anything is internal stability. Whatever you need to achieve that, getting access to that is what matters. But all of this left me with a clear problem in the social sphere. At the end of the day, people do not understand what schizophrenia does to people. It's something that's practically impossible to explain what the experience is and how it fucks you up outside of dealing with how symptoms surface. My fears of being ignored, being labeled as the schizo who is not just seeing the world very differently, but somehow very incorrectly, are realified, but in subtle ways that I didn't expect. It's not that people won't listen to you, but people will often tokenize you and reject you the moment that you step outside ordinary boundaries. I could never confide in what I truly believe and what I experience to many people, because if I did, it would resign much of my life to fantasy. But that's not how I experience it. In fact, I have to experience things this way in order to even function in a real material sense. The thing is, it's not the schizophrenia alone that produces this. I've proven well enough over 5 years that even through my periods of extreme disturbance, such as when I created the video about higher superstition and the intellectual imposter video both in 2021, I can speak in a coherent way that non-psychotic people can understand. What produces this is a social apparatus that surrounds the subject of mental disturbance, one that is clearly on display with figures like Sam Harris using divine delusions as a way to explain the existence of religion, which he views as illogical and dangerous. It takes a certain kind of person to believe what no one else believes. To be ruled by ideas for which you have no evidence is generally a sign that something is seriously wrong with your mind. Clearly, there is sanity in numbers, and yet it is merely an accident of history that it is considered normal in our society to believe that the creator of the universe can hear your thoughts, while it is demonstrative of mental illness to believe that he is communicating with you by having the rain tap in Morse code on your bedroom window. And so, while religious people are generally not mad, their core beliefs absolutely are. This is not surprising, since most religions have merely canonized a few products of ancient ignorance and derangement and passed them down to us as though they were primordial truths. This leaves billions of us believing what no sane person would believe on his own. In fact, it is difficult to imagine a set of beliefs more suggestive of mental illness than those that lie at the heart of many of our religious traditions. Or how Richard Dawkins bizarrely suggests another author who implies that religion and epilepsy may somehow be related. The proximate cause of religion might be hyperactivity in a particular node of the brain. I shall not pursue the neurological idea of a God center in the brain because I am not concerned here with approximate questions. That is not to belittle them. I recommend Michael Shermer's How We Believe, The Search for God in an Age of Science for a succinct discussion, which includes the suggestion by Michael Persinger and other that visionary religious experiences are related to temporal lobe epilepsy. As is clear here, we're told quite directly that our bodies are producing these experiences as clearly invalid, that it produces irrational beliefs, and it can even be incredibly dangerous. These can include the new kinds of language, logic, and experiences produced in our heads, all of which many people want to shut the hell up. Our ideas are dangerous, as clearly stated by these rationalists, and even disconnected from reality. But not just any reality, the homogeneous, commonly accepted reality of the outside world, one that I don't believe anyone really has direct access to, but they repeat through their actions and behaviors imperfectly, as they've seen repeated through stories, adages, media, and even architecture. Again, it is not unfounded to believe that your words mean nothing anymore when the dominant reality dismisses the possible productivity of their organization. These men said this not because they think that psychosis produces anything, but because they need a subject to scapegoat on their perceived horrors of the production of religion, a complex subject outside of the scope of this video. And what better way to brush off the development of religion than to say it was simply produced by nonsense? This presents a serious problem. What political value could even be produced by interfacing with nonsense? This is a question that in the 1960s, the French still-in-training psychoanalyst Félix Guattari was interested in exploring in the essay Reflections on Institutional Psychotherapy for Philosophers, an essay contained in the collection Psychoanalysis and Transversality. See, Guattari worked in a special mental hospital called Laborde, and there they practiced a radical approach to psychiatry called institutional psychotherapy. This approach to psychiatry was a means to both transform psychoanalysis to be more functional in an institutional setting, but also a means to transform the very social relations in the hospital itself. It was influenced by a desire to combine the social critique of Marx with the existential questions of Freudian psychoanalysis. The idea was that the institution itself could be an instrument contributing towards successful treatment. Thus, the goal was to reconstruct traditional social hierarchies between doctors, nurses, hospital workers, and patients. In order to do that, Guattari was faced with many challenges in understanding how to reorganize the functional parts of the institution. Guattari at this time was not a psychoanalyst or psychiatrist working directly with patients for treatment, but rather he would organize social activities in the facility and helped coordinate communications with the outside community, all while he was training under Lacan and gaining valuable field experience with trained psychiatrists. In this essay, Guattari explores the construction of new concepts using the subjective worlds of different scientific fields to demonstrate that the perspectives of all human experiences are valuable towards political activity, even so-called nonsense ones. Guattari thinks there is a major issue with how philosophy, at least at the time, organized itself relative to other fields, such as those of scientific research or clinical practice. As he puts it, the philosophical institution, in this case, serves as the head curator of the museum of outmoded concepts. In fact, it generally remains at a safe distance from any innovation. In a funny way, the paranoia that Richard Dawkins has in The Selfish Gene of humanities majors failing to recognize the importance of Darwin is corroborated through Guattari's experience in clinical practice. But to Guattari, the problem is not just one of conflicting interests, but much more one with a problem inherent to the concept of studying philosophy itself. He turns to his work in institutional psychotherapy at Laborde to better explain. See, in order to solve the difficult problems presented by institutional psychotherapy's goals, the practitioners had to think hard about how to understand the current topology of the problem. They analyzed it, and through this analysis, they would produce new concepts that would be able to translate ideas into practice. Remember, they were trying to use the institution itself to help treat patients of schizophrenia and other severe mental disturbances. One of these concepts that the workers at Laborde came up with was the concept of group subjectivity. Now, I know that sounds a little crazy. What the hell even is subjectivity to begin with? It might help to think about this a little through the lens of treatment in psychotherapy. If we imagine you are in a therapist's office, there is a two-way relationship between you and the therapist. When you talk about your issues, you are talking about yourself as the subject, just like the subject of a sentence when you are studying English. You are the subject. And the inner world of this subject that you are talking about to this therapist is called subjectivity. Everything outside of you, on the other hand, is something called the other. And you can think of this as like the outside of your head. The other interacts with your subjectivity, but it has contents that are inaccessible to it. This interaction is where the concept of the unconscious comes from. The unconscious is not just some vague mystical space where anything can happen. It's just the stuff that's not accessible from your perspective directly. The goal of the psychoanalyst is to analyze relationships to the subject's unconscious through talk therapy. Now, this way of analyzing subjects is very individualistic. Every individual has their own subject. This is the basis and underpinning of the concept of individualism, where everyone is a unique and special snowflake that has the free agency to do whatever they want. Clearly, it's your fault if you make a mistake. But is this actually true? Is it really true that your subjectivity is produced individually? Guattari suggests that this is not the case. For one thing, subjectivity isn't produced by consciousness. Think about the therapist relation we just talked about. The subjectivity of the subject is not actually produced by them having conscious thought. It's produced specifically by the relationship between the subject and the other. This means that not only can there be subjects that are not conscious individuals, but it also means that there can be conscious individuals who are not subjects. And it also means that subjectivity must be produced in some other way. A social way. This then turns Guattari to the concept of group subjectivity. This is the idea that not only individuals have subjectivity, but groups have subjectivity too. They have their own set of relationships within itself that can be described with a structured analysis, similar to psychoanalysis. This is important because the transition from the therapist's couch to the mental institution requires a transition from a one-on-one conversation to a group setting. Through the use of building structures around the concept of group subjectivity, Guattari and the other people working at Laborde could organize their facility around constructing new ways to engage with individual subjectivity through modifying the structures of what produced group subjectivity. Another way to think about of what Guattari was proposing is to think of a story in a movie. When you change how the plot works, the characters change their tune. Most times when we think of a character killed on screen by another, it's seen as a morally wrong thing to do for the character, but this can be recontextualized around events in the story and change whether or not the character is seen as good, bad, or even something a lot more complex. What produces individual subjectivity then is a product of the group interactions. Guattari believed that not only is this important for transitioning the theory beyond psychotherapy of the time to an institutional setting, but also that it had important consequences for philosophy as well. After all, philosophy is trying to claim that it is the group subjectivity of all sorts of thought. However, instead, Guattari claims that it is more like a museum curated with concepts, because as it functioned at his time, and still to this day, philosophy acts more as simply a lens to retroactively analyze the contents of various fields of study, such as literature or the sciences, rather than producing blazing new ideas. But as a result of this approach of trying to explain everything, it misses the details in each of these fields of study that have produced revolutions on not only their own field, but also how to see the world. Just as how the concepts of group subjectivity revolutionizes the way that we can think about philosophy. Every field of study, whether it be literature, linguistics, biology, or quantum mechanics, has the potential to reveal something truly revolutionary about our relationship with the world, whether it be society, politics, or even existence itself. If, for example, we used philosophy in a more active way, as a way to brew new concepts to analyze the connections between group subjectivity and other fields, such as politics, it could provide all sorts of useful concepts for other fields to work with that could provide more useful intersectional interactions between these fields. Because group subjectivity has the ability to transform philosophy in such a profound way, it is no surprise that the potential also exists on the scale of entire societies and economies. In the case of the economy, the group subjectivity is produced by the economic conditions that organize its components. This is then used to mass produce and distribute a subjectivity to the masses. Guattari states, "The fact that existing economic systems, if they are not reclaimed by a social class capable of surpassing its own interests and imposing the creation of a classless society, are therefore constantly secreting social institutions that transform individuals into the cogs of a vast machine, poses the problem in return of assuming social subjectivity to be the inevitable final term of the process of production. Is it possible to conceive of a social force taking power that has norms that are compatible with the minimal exercise of authentic human language? Will all social evolution move in the direction of an ever-increasing oppression of human desire? The thing is, perhaps there is a way to reorganize our relations to politics and the economy that allows us to become subjects with voices again, instead of being part of a larger and larger machine that systemizes us. The concept of social subjectivity gives us a means to conceptualize and analyze the problem and construct possibly new kinds of social institutions that can be better at giving power and voices to people. However, in order to do this, we have to understand what to do with minority voices, including those that we believe are irrational nonsense. Part of the reason why I bring up Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins is because they were part of a large media political movement based around criticizing fundamentalist Christians in the 2000s, which played a large role in laying the foundation of how we understand discourse and politics on the internet today. In this movement, authors like these emphasized rational structures that were reflections on the most accurate reality that we know. Harris even mentions the importance of group consensus for understanding the nature of reality in the quote mentioned earlier. As a consequence, the answer to these questions that this line of thought provides to how strange and oppressive beliefs, such as religion, could exist and have such dominant power in human politics is that they must have been created by irrational forces and utilized repetition and mimetics to propagate their codes. Or, in other words, somehow some of the bad irrational codes escaped the structure and caused a glitch in mimetic selection to propagate and placate the masses. This is quite interesting because, again, Guattari points out that the hierarchies of capitalism function in a very similar way, that capitalist subjectivity mass produces the organization of individual subjectivity among all of its subjects. Through this subjectivity, desires that aren't organized readily are repressed through social structures such as guilt, perversion, and even institutions of the state such as the law and psychiatry to regulate everything that doesn't fit. Thus, in a way, this atheist skeptic group from the 2000s was actually another way that capitalist subjectivity reproduces itself, by installing into every individual involved with the movement the idea of rational and irrational thoughts, and what to do with such things. While it may be used to categorize targets useful to the movement, such as fundamentalist Christians, it was ultimately used to also target minorities, especially non-white people, trans people, and of course, schizophrenics. But perhaps, if we were to actively try to organize social relations differently, maybe not on the scale of nations, since it's gonna be really hard to do that on a personal level, but maybe the scale of your local community and neighbors, and try to produce a new social reality by actively producing new social relations among yourselves and producing new social subjectivities. Perhaps new ways of understanding the world around you can emerge, ways that can solve problems far beyond what you first thought possible. Maybe the solution to untangling so many of the world's problems really starts with thinking about what kind of world we are continuing to produce. So many videos on YouTube right now are rightfully criticizing hyper-consumerism, Labubus, Dubai chocolate, insane car prices, buy now, pay later, fast fashion, and purchasing and mass gambling. But they reproduce the individualist subjectivity that got them there by continuing to treat customers as if they have a choice, as if not every interface the customer engages with through the market is carefully curated to extract every cent they can through psychological shakedown. The only thing most of these people can think to do is to reinforce the reality that we should be punished for making poor consumer mistakes instead of questioning the very reason why we're being offered ugly demon dolls and blind boxes, $20 chocolate bars, extended payment plans, or $100,000 dipshit mobiles in the first place. But to truly stop the cycle, we need to think serious about what the machines of capital are producing. Instead of guilt-tripping everyone and reinforcing that the dominant reality is perfectly fine, we could change our relations by using local activities such as feeding the homeless, community or urban farms, group activities, and community-curated spaces. The paranoid suburban reality that is beamed directly to our eyeballs through mass media that continues to alienate each and every one of us from our communities can be overcome by recognizing that we do not have to live in the world that we are told to love through the television. Either way, what is clear is that our current subjectivity deadlock is caused by a failure to recognize the group subject that is currently mass-producing all of us and how we currently interface with reality. But you may ask yourself, that's all fine and well, Felix, but what does this matter to the schizophrenic subject? Surprisingly, it is the schizophrenic who offers some of the most important insight, because it is the subject of the schizophrenic who is constantly being squeezed out of the discussion through the very recognition of rational discourse. We can see in action through how schizophrenia is weaponized as a tool to suppress minorities. Those black people who model themselves off of good white men, wearing suits and with fancy English names, erasing everything they can off of themselves, are permitted into rational spaces. But where do the frustrated, the forgotten, and the radical find themselves? Those who wish to find themselves their own identity, finally separated from the white man. Or what about the extensive history of the institutionalization of homosexual or transgender people? Schizophrenia and mental illness is used as a means to silence the voices through the face of so-called rational thinking by exploiting the machines of diagnosis. But on the other side of the coin, schizophrenia is such a horrible, inhuman subject to some people that its very existence is even erased in this discourse. Some people go beyond simply believing that schizophrenia is overdiagnosed and suggest that schizophrenia does not exist and all psychosis is a manufactured construct of society, further erasing the experiences of those who do experience psychosis. Why is society so insistent on erasing the experience of the schizophrenic, even our so-called allies? Why cannot the schizophrenic be seen as a human too? It isn't that schizophrenics cannot be capable of producing coherent, useful ontologies themselves. Guattari laments, "Will the day ever come when President Schreber's and Oughtred's definition of God are studied with the same attention and same rigor as those of Descartes or Malebranche?" Unlike many others, Guattari believed in the potential of schizophrenic productivity. But the problem goes beyond the schizophrenic. It is not just that the schizophrenics themselves is a revolutionary subject that non-schizophrenics should aspire to be, or that we should dress schizophrenics in uniform and send them to the front lines to be obliterated. It is that the subject of the schizophrenic is an edge case scenario that reveals the failures of the current mode of political and economic organization. Guattari continues, "How long will we maintain the separation between theoretical critique and the concrete analytical activity of the human sciences? Can the damage caused by this divide at the heart of anthropology be equated to the circumstances that split the world into an iron curtain?" As we explore how to truly integrate the schizophrenic into a social context, such as in a mental hospital, the process reveals much more than just how to run a mental institution. It reveals core problems in the way that we conceptualize politics, socialization, and philosophy, and it is through this realization that causes me to continue to pursue my journey as a schizonaut. It's not for everyone. I compare it to mountain climbing because it requires a lot of work and mental stamina. But at the end of the day, what world that is revealed to me, the world that organizes my real-world production and influences the world around me, can be used to make waves, ruptures, to disturb the current bland repetition of society and to shape social subjectivity beyond myself to try to make the world a bit of a better place for not just me, but all of us together.